Trainium, Gravitons, Blackwell. Oh my. You're watching TechStrong, gang. Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimel, and we are still here in Las Vegas. You know, I do have a 3-day rule at Vegas, and I'm running up against the edge of it here. I hope I've got a real hot shower waiting for me at home. But it's been a great AWS reInvent. In many ways, it's, I think, a watershed moment in AWS history with a lot of the announcements here. We've got a lot to bring you today, including a new version of a new generation of the Graviton chip that was announced yesterday. You know, hardware sexy. There's no doubt about it. We spend a lot of time talking hardware. Let me introduce you to our gang, though. We've got a lot more to cover, too. But if I want to introduce you to these two guys, they've been sitting here. To my far right, you know our friend Mitch Ashley, future analyst. And the man in the middle, the bard, Mike Vizard, who, happy anniversary to Mike and Charlene, by the way.
There you go.
So Mike, congratulations on the anniversary.
Thank you. There's a lot of bookies in Vegas that are losing money.
Yeah. They took the under. But no, seriously, congratulations. Lucky you. But let's talk AWS reInvent.
All right. So they previewed the new Graviton 5, which is 25% better than the Graviton 4, both of which are based on an ARM design that AWS custom builds itself. And the other thing that was interesting is they revealed for the third year in a row, roughly half of the new instances being spun up on the AWS clouds are Graviton chips, which is, you know, a significant number of workloads that probably used to be on an x86 processor somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it also turns out that all the managed services that AWS provides by default run on AWS custom silicon. They do not run any of those things on any processors that they offer other customers elsewhere. And basically they're saying, look, there are certain databases that require an x86, so, you know, we'll provide that capability. And if you really want NVIDIA, we'll provide that capability as well. But, you know, they themselves are going with their own custom silicon just because it's less expensive for them to run. And they say, hey, the TCO is better. And of course, it's more profitable for them as well. But it's pretty clear that AWS is saying, you know, we're leading heavily with our own custom silicon here first. And everything else is kind of, you know, if you want it, you can have it kind of mentality. But you got to actually, like, raise your hand and say, make sure I'm running on that.
That's why it's such a different world for Intel these days, right? I mean, and it's, you know, Apple has its chips, et cetera, all right on down the line. It's about price performance. Right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned cost, right?
It's price performance. It's also control. Supply chain.
That's true. Yeah, in this day and age, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, it's an interesting thing because, look, we all grew up in basically a Wintel monopoly.
Yeah, it was Intel inside, baby.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even Mac was running Intel back then. And I sometimes think that ARM doesn't get enough credit for cracking this case wide open.
It's huge. Yeah.
Right? It was ARM that led the way to these custom chips and compatibility. And you know, it wasn't easy getting Microsoft to port Windows to ARM. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, it was easier with Linux and some of the open source stuff because you had the army of, you know, crowdsourced open source engineers who could make that happen. But this is the future we see now, we live in now, where we're not locked into Intel inside. We're not locked in, you know, AMD, poor AMD spent all those years making a great 86 chip. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a little late for that, though they're here with the GPUs maybe. Mm. One thing I've got to mention, though, I want to set the record straight, and I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me so. AWS doesn't own foundries. As a matter of fact, AWS doesn't actually design the chips. They hire out.
This is all OEM outsourced,
Yeah.
right? They provide the specs and the design.
Yeah,
Do some of the design themselves. But
Yeah, they do some of the design, but they're not building a foundry.
No, they're
it's
not.
all OEM, and that's the beauty of the ARM design, right? It's licensing the technology to be able to design your own chips, and
So are the new Gravitons and Trainiums? What foundry are they using?
I don't know. They don't say, and I think they just shop around because there's a ton of these ARM foundries out there now that you can use to generate. It's a 3 nanometer chip is the latest one, so they're down to that particular size generation. But the thing about it is that it gives them options, right? They can move from one foundry to the other. They're not as dependent upon a particular.
Well, that's the point, right? Is they're in the chip business, but they're not a foundry. They're not a direct manufacturer. They're an OEM client.
they have chips designed for themselves, or they design them themselves.
It gives them the ultimate flexibility to have chips made to their spec. It gives them the ability not to be subject to price wars, supply chain, geopolitical kind of instances. And you know what? To me, it validates Pat Gelsinger's vision of Intel, which is be the foundry that makes all of these different chips, not just your own. We're living in a world where this isn't just an AWS thing. Google has their own. Microsoft wants to go their own way. Oracle, IBM, everybody wants to kind of own their own custom silicon, if you will. It's back to, Mitch, when we first started selling security appliances, right? There were the ones that were just x86 inside that we OEM'd from Dell.
They were like,
And then there were the ASIC ones, purpose-built that really couldn't kind of handle the kind of traffic that we were seeing and stuff like that. It's the same thing playing itself out right now.
Yeah, they are saying that a Java app runs pretty smoothly without any tweaking, but some of the C apps and the Rust apps require a little bit of tweaking to get onto the ARM processor, but they're saying that's gotten a lot easier. And they're also pointing out that the classes of workloads now are starting to move higher up, and you're going to see more with this latest processor of things like databases, analytics, and electronic design automation was another use case that they were looking at. And so the percentage and the types of workloads that can run on these things are starting to creep up into the higher end. And you can imagine they're saying they're on a 2-year cadence for the next generation. So if we're in 2028, you're probably looking at a new class of processors that can run just about anything that you have on those ARM processors. And it's going to be an interesting world because you see Microsoft doing pretty much the same thing. And if all the cloud providers are doing all the same thing, it's like, well, what is the market opportunity for the Intels and the AMD?
As a foundry, not as an x86 producer.
well, and this didn't all happen, overnight. ARM has been on a multi-year quest of getting organizations, open source projects, getting drivers, getting everything running on ARM. And they've added a lot of support to the open source projects, for example.
Absolutely.
I remember seeing 3 years at one of the conferences talking with ARM folks there, and why were they there? And that was the whole reason. If you kind of build the stack up so you've got support, and it's closing the gaps where you've got them when that occurs, and as opposed to we can't do it because there's such a big hill to climb to get there to run on. We're not there anymore. We're actually in a good place.
I don't know if they're thinking about it or has said anything of the kind, but I could imagine a world where maybe there's an ARM processor optimized for AI inference servers.
I would be surprised if they were
thinking about. I think we'll see it sooner than later. Though, makes me wax nostalgic a little bit, right? Think back before x86 was the data center machine of choice, right? I was an UltraSpark guy, right?
DEC.
You had DEC and you had Silicon Graphics and you had, think back to some of those machines and the difference. And you know what? And it wasn't just the chip, but each chip had its own flavor of Unix, right? There wasn't just Linux. Think about before there was this
before
Linux. Yeah. but we had all the Unixes. And
You
even
had Motorola. I mean, what,
yeah,
the Apple,
well, Motorola was a big,
Apple's on,
yeah.
the Macs were.
And you know what? Let's talk about Apple in this context. They kind of led the way, not in the data center certainly, but on the desktop. They showed it's
And mobile
possible,
device, yeah.
right? And mobile, right? They showed it's possible. And we should talk about that too. You have, what we consider mobile, the sort of lightweight, more energy efficient, the Qualcomm Snapdragons and stuff. They're running laptops and desktops all over. Might we see a Qualcomm enter into the data center space? Because, hey, we're building $3 trillion of data centers. That's a pretty big pie.
It's possible.
If there's a market, right? If they see themselves in that market and they see a competitive edge, that they can bring something to market, they will.
Let me throw one other thing out at you guys and tell me what you think. Is this a lock-in play by AWS? If you optimize your app for Graviton 5, does it make it a hassle to move over to Azure or Google?
It's one more little thing that makes you kind of want to stay with AWS, because you might have to refactor your app a little bit to take advantage of whatever optimization those guys have put together, right? So eventually you might decide that it's not worth the effort. So
because that is what we lose by having a PAX 86 world, right? Where you do have that portability.
I think you're more likely going to have stickiness from the AWS services that you're using, the Dynamo DBs and all the things that you're tied into the ecosystem.
Right.
Less so at the chip level, because there's not going to be that much differentiation.
Right.
I don't think. I think they're doing it for cost performance. They don't want to lock customers in that way. That's not their game. They're going to lock in on software services.
So, but AWS does have this kind of interesting little lock-in that they do use, right? They have this Nitro system.
They do.
And Nitro is essentially offloading the running of the VM and the storage and the security onto a separate NIC card. Well, I can't replicate that over at Google per se. So if I'm going to take advantage of that, then I got to go figure out what is the version of that over at Google. And I'm not sure what Google has that is the equivalent of their Nitro, but it's a significant amount of effort to kind of rework all that.
It is, and it's an advantage from a security perspective and security within AI. That's kind of how they really pitched it 2 years ago when they went into more depth about how they built Nitro or how they pulled things off the chip into the separate. Yeah. It's kind of a chip within a chip, or a chip on a board that offloads those processes.
Yeah. If you go talk to the AWS engineers, they're like, that's the best thing we ever did was Nitro, because that's what gives them a performance edge in their mind that differentiates them from other cloud service providers.
Absolutely. Hey, we got to move on to our next segment here, okay? So we're going to take a break. We're coming at you from Vegas, AWS reInvent. You're watching TechStrong Game.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection, defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hey folks, we're back, and we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about, security in AWS. They've made generally available this security hub that they announced earlier this year, and it's basically a huge data lake for aggregating and analyzing all the telemetry data that you collect from all these different sources. I think AWS has been doing this internally for themselves for years, and this is a productization of that capability for their end customer. The concept is that you're going to collect all these signals and the metadata, and when you see an anomaly, there'll be an alert, and then eventually an agent will look at that and kind of pass on a message to some DevOps tool that says, hey, there's an issue here, maybe with this configuration. Do you want us to refix that for you? Automatically, it might close that loop, but eventually we seem to be moving down this path where a lot of this is going to get automated. And then the other thing they were talking about is, how they're going to move everybody to short-lived tokens, because part of the issue is that too many developers are making use of longer time tokens that when they get stolen can be used for longer periods of time. So they're trying to say to everybody, hey, use a short-lived token so that if that laptop goes missing, it won't be as big an issue. And they're also pointing out the fact that they tied their MFA to the browser security. So they look at the browser and then they say, hey, if you can authenticate it, then at least we can pass that authentication in a federated way back to the CLI tool. So they're, making some efforts here to make the whole thing more secure and address a lot of the issues that folks have with cloud security. But I kind of always scratch my head about this. When we talk about concerns about cloud security, are we really talking about, we think that the cloud is less secure than on-premise? Or are we really saying we don't know how it works and we don't have the processes and the tools, so we kind of still prefer the on-premise mindset because we don't want to learn something new? I mean, how much of this is cultural versus technical?
Well, I think these announcements are more about similar to what Cisco did with their AI, with their Cisco Data Fabric, right? Which is kind of the same idea of, instead of just aggregating things together, let's put more contextualization around it, rather than just a bunch of siloed data kind of co-located together. Let's put it into some kind of a data lake or some data method, data structure that can be used by their tools and help reduce some of the complexity. I think that's a big part of it, is since you don't run all these tools yourself, you don't necessarily know how to integrate them, or maybe you can't, right? Especially if they're a third party like the cloud providers. So you have to rely on them to do this. So I assume this is a big push from customers to say, we need easier ways, we need less complexity about managing security in the cloud, at least for the data fabric part of it.
I think the definition of shared responsibility keeps shifting a little bit.
There's only one responsibility, and that's yours. Doesn't matter. I mean, you can talk about shared all you want.
You could share
Ultimately, it falls on
administration, but you don't share responsibility. Look, here's Shimmy's take on this one. Right? All the noise about cloud security, there's only one thing in cloud security that, well, you're responsible for everything, but there's only one area where you could really kind of rig the deck, and that's identity and access management. That is the killer app of cloud security, and that's what this is all about, IAM. In terms of token, this is an AWS's idea. NIST has been pushing this. Google's been pushing this.
You see it in the browser.
They want browser certificates to expire.
Yeah.
We went from yearly to quarterly. They want to go to 30 days and get to a week or a day even, right? Because good security practices is if we could make you re-authenticate as often as possible, the least chance we have that you are.
If it's stolen,
say you
somebody can. It's only good
right,
for
and there's a short window, right, of its viability. So this is kind of security 101. Now, that being said, bravo to AWS for doing this, because this is what cloud providers need to be doing, right? Google's on board with it. I'm not sure about Microsoft. AWS appears to be. But I think this is the future we're going to live in, right? We're going to MFAs and biometric and stuff like that. If we could just get rid of these damn passwords.
I just wish that the MFA stuff was a little smoother, and it's not like, every time I'm kind of like logging into something, I'm like, damn it, where's my phone? I got to get the authenticator.
Yeah, you got to have your phone next to you in the world of MFA. My problem is I'm a multi lot of things, but I'm a multi-device user. Right, so it's like, yeah, I've authenticated the browser on this device, but I haven't authenticated the browser on that device. I use about 5 different devices, and I'm constantly playing the authenticate this particular version of this particular browser on this particular device, and the permutations drive me crazy.
And it's still clunky. I mean, it's
Yeah.
clunky even with passkeys. I mean, yes, it's simple when you can use it, but oftentimes it's like, well, the passkey didn't work on that one. Or choose what you want to use, which passkey or which
That's
passkey
the
or
thing. I
password.
forget what passkeys I
So,
use.
so we kind of kick ourselves when we do good things for security by making it complex to use, by presenting options.
It defeats the
You know,
purpose.
flexibility brings complexity, and that's often where we fall down on.
I would like a clear ID for all this and be done.
Charge $45 if you don't have a clear ID when you show up at the
No,
airport.
that's real ID.
Okay, all right.
Real ID. Yeah, well, look, someone's got to pay.
In theory, though, right, we're getting to a world where there will be sensors everywhere. So at some point, the sensor should be able to know that you is you and send that information over to somebody and say, yep, that is Alan at the edge of that particular device. And maybe we will get to something that's not nearly as clunky.
From your mouth. Let's take a break. We're going to ruminate on that a little bit. We're going to come back and talk about our third session today here for our special TechStrong gang from AWS reInvent.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're going to continue a conversation we've been having all week about AI and DevOps and DevSecOps, and the folks at Harness are here, and they announced that they're adding support for the AI coding tool from AWS called Kiro. And we've been trying to figure out what is going to be the relationship between how far our DevOps process is going to be shifted left, because Kiro has a lot of AI agents that will in parallel do things that historically a DevOps engineer did, and including observe and maybe fixing code and patching. But Harness is saying that they too will have AI agents, and their AI agents will communicate with the Kiro AI agent. And then I did talk to the AWS DevOps people, and they were saying, we want to manage that process more, but we do not want to provide the code repository or the CI/CD platform either. They're like, we just want to layer the agents across to take care of the friction. And if the agents are from third parties, that's fine. But they seem to be trying to find a happy medium here. I mean, what's your take?
I see a lot of Harness electric billboards in my window up here on the 34th floor. Harness has a big presence here. Kudos to them for not just laying down, rolling over and saying, we'll use the AWS agents. I think in a world of billions and billions of agents, there's room for CI/CD DevOps specialists such as Harness to have a very effective DevOps group of agents that help you with DevOps, where, you know, in no disrespect for AWS, but their agents will probably be the 80-20 agents, right? 80% of the functionality of what that dedicated Harness agent is, but at a 20% of the price. And I think that may be enough for some people. And there may be other people, especially if they're already using Harness for CI/CD, who say, no, I'll use the Harness agents, and the fact that it does integrate with the Kiro and the AWS infrastructure is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting because when I talked to the AWS folks, they were saying the part that they really want to get after is what occurs after code gets checked in and when it gets deployed in the production environment, because they were saying there's just a lot of friction, there's a lot of inefficiencies, and they want to build, the AI framework to manage that. And if that involves, agents from the providers of the repositories and the CI/CD, so much the better. But you've been looking at that workflow forever. What is it in that between when I check in the code and it runs in production that is like creating this infinite amount of friction?
Well, first, kind of like one thing that I see happening with all the vendors is folks have realized we can't be the agent of everything. We can't be the AI of everything. What do we do well? What's our part in this ecosystem? And how do we take an AI strategy that builds on our strengths as opposed to going after, in this case, it doesn't make sense for AWS to go after all the development agent process part of it or become the code repository or whatever. That's got huge inertia behind it already with other options, right? So rather than forcing people into an AWS solution for that, they are tackling it with the IDE though. The part of it, it's deployment. We've always run into this with CI/CD, Alan. It's like CI, big, little CD, right? Because that trust around automation of deploying things into production, we've always had steps to review and checklists and production ready, whatever kinds of things. Now, not everybody does that. You can GitOps it all the way into production, but there's a lot more caution about releasing it. I think it goes back to the trust issue. How much we'll automate, but we still won't kind of turn it over to even a Perl script or a Python script, whatever might be underneath running that. Will we do that with AI? I think that's the goal. How do we move that? And by the way, I think Harness is super smart for not saying, well, we're just playing our little sandbox here. No, everybody, whether it's security, whether it's deployment, et cetera, compliance, they're moving up they're shifting left by getting into the agent ecosystem.
AWS did say something that's going to warm your heart. They were saying, hey, we're using AI and coding tools and agents to write more code than ever. And if you don't have a CI platform to manage all that, you most certainly will need one soon.
Yeah,
So
I think that's for sure. I think there's something to your point on the CI/CD stuff. Harness is a little bit of a different animal than some of the other CI/CD players in that, and I've spoken about this with Jody, their founder, Jody Bonsai. They were designed from the get-go to be CD. Most of the CI/CD solutions out there started life as a CI.
Right.
And then, added the, big CI, little CD. Harness is big CD, little CI. So it is different. And it did embrace GitOps pretty early on and say, hey, we work really well in that GitOps type of environment and that GitOps model. So I think they are well positioned to do this, perhaps more than some of the other DevOps players.
The only thing I hear out there that people are looking at for CD as an alternative is you hear a lot about Argo, which is, as far as I can tell, looking at it, is a much more graphical approach to CD rather than programmatic.
That depends if you're using the pure open source Argo CD,
Right.
or you're using like the Octopus deploy version of it, which is more graphical and has a better UX. Suppose, look, UX is what you like, may not be
I had the
what I
beholder
like.
on
But,
that.
Yeah.
but those people tend to argue that the CD side of the equation is really, an ops function, and it's not something that the developer drives as much. And
so
so
now you're getting into the nitty gritty of what's
we're-
dev, what's ops, and what's DevOps.
What's platform?
We're all in
Welcome to the religion.
Yeah. I don't talk about politics and religion. You know me. But
Excuse me.
be that as it may.
Got a little choked up there. Excuse me.
Yeah. But you know what? It is going to be interesting. But hey, as I said before, Harness has a huge presence out here. They obviously feel this is where their people are. And they're making a play for them. And Mitchell, they're shifting left, moving up. But they want to be a player in this new ecosystem.
Absolutely do. And I've heard their story, and they've got a great story. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is very impressive.
I was on the show floor yesterday walking around, and I was just taking note of all the DevOps companies that were here. I mean, they're all here with big booths, and including some outfits I never heard of. And I was like looking at some of their booths, and I was like, wow, this is huge, and I have no idea who you are. And
Well, it's interesting. I overheard a vendor talking yesterday. Hey, we got to go reserve our booth for next year because we need a bigger booth and we're too far out. We got to be more in the center. Let's take money from other events and double down here because this is where our audience is.
Interesting.
And you don't hear that very often at shows these days.
Usually it's complaining about how expensive it is.
It is. And this company was already in for $100K. So they're moving. Now, I did hear, and I cannot divulge sources here, even if you want to,
Methods and sources, can you?
yeah, deep throat, but easy. But I heard Reinforce might be going away. Well, not going away, but they're going to merge it into reInvent. It's not going to be a standalone.
The security conference?
Yeah.
Reinforce. I haven't heard that. I could see that. I mean, well, reInvent started as a developer conference. I mean, I went to the first reInvent. It was because that's who was really.
But I'm going to tell you something. This reInvent was a return to its roots. It was developer
the
first.
reemergence of the developer
Right,
conference.
a developer-led conference. But it'll be interesting to see if Reinforce gets merged into this or stay standalone. Look, we have RSA, we have Black Hat as big security conferences. Reinforce was never that size, but it had a nice following. And what I liked it was
They're good
on the East Coast. And
I think there's something to be said for bringing everybody together to have the same conversation at the same time about the same thing.
I think the problem is it's already really hard to put 60,000 people into the same conversation. I don't know if I want to add 20 more.
I would argue spin off and do a real developer conference.
So says the developer guy.
Backpacks and hoodies. I'm serious that that's the crowd you're going after. You want the GitHub style. You want the build or style kind of event or the Ignite style event. Tech Exchange, those kinds of conferences that are let me give you an example. You go to IBM Think versus IBM Tech Exchange, two very big differences, right? It's all about sandboxes and trialing things and working with tools and experimenting and showing demos and codathons and hackathons and things like that. Versus you go to the corporate conference, it's all about kind of the bigger things that are happening at the mothership. I think developers, if you want to attract developers, give them what they want, right?
Fair enough. Hey guys, we've got to wrap up. You know what? It's been an amazing week out here at reInvent. So much news. I think we'll still be digesting all of this for the weeks ahead on the gang and throughout our TechStrong properties. But Mitch, I appreciate you coming down
Bet.
every day. Mike, as always, doing yeoman's work, walking that floor, ferreting out the latest, the underground, the seldom seen.
Putting the tee on the ball for the three of us to hit it on a TechStrong gang.
I appreciate it. I thank all of you who've been catching any of our videos this week. I think we probably have done 20-something videos in the 3 days, maybe more. So it's been great. We had the Futurum analyst on. We had Daniel Newman on. Our friends, I can't help but thank SUSE. Oh, this isn't their logo, but we've had their logo behind here. SUSE has partnered with us this year in bringing this to you. We love coming out to reInvent. It was a little warmer in Vegas in the winter. See what we could do about that. But we hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow, though, with our regular gang show, from Boca. And I think, anyway, and God willing, and we'll go from there. But for now, on behalf of Mike and Mitch and everyone from Futurum and TechStrong and SUSE, thank you for joining us. It's a wrap. Bye-bye.